All right, so I had a couple different thoughts about what I wanted to talk about this week. I'm trying to do one a week for the foreseeable future. I have a list of things that I want to discuss. Some of them have been touched on in the comments, and I was thinking about doing this for today, and then there was a comment that from my brother that said he'd like to hear this. So I'm going to talk a little bit. It's a little bit removed from anything directly related to depression or mental health, but it is part of how I see the world, and I think it's valuable to explore. And so I'm going to talk today about how I understand the concept of sin. Um, and I know that I have quite a few friends that are atheist in their leanings. I know that I have friends that are not members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is the religion that I follow. And I know that there are a lot of different kind of ideas about what sin means. And I've thought a lot about it. And I realize that there are probably going to be some people who disagree with this, and that's great. If we can have a cooperative conversation about it, awesome. I'd be happy to engage in that conversation. If it gets tense or mean, I'll just delete the comments or whatever, because I think that this is valuable in helping people understand where I come from. And the way I want to approach this is to actually kind of use a sort of an example, a test case, maybe a metaphor. I don't know what word I want to use for it, but a way of looking at this concept from a lens that I think will help. And so I'm going to talk about the concept of drinking, specifically for those of you who get a little nitpicky about this kind of stuff, about drinking alcohol. Okay. So as part of my theology, as part of my religion, we are taught that drinking alcohol is wrong. It's something you shouldn't do. And if you do something you know you shouldn't do, then that's sinful. So in my theology, drinking alcohol is a sin. Okay. Um, and the reason I'm choosing this is because I, gosh, I've never quite figured out exactly how to phrase this, but I know quite a few people for whom faith in God isn't part of their system, but I think for them drinking alcohol would still be considered a sin. And that is, I have more than one friend who's a recovering alcoholic, and they know that drinking alcohol is bad for them. They know it. They know that even one drink is one too many. Several of them are many years sober, and I think that's wonderful for them to be able to kind of get to the point where they've taken this demon and put it out of their lives. Um, and so I think that's the key thing for me about what it means to sin, is knowing that you're doing something that you shouldn't, knowing that it is wrong for you to do it. And that creates complications, right? Because I have friends who do drink. I have friends who drink and they see nothing wrong with it. And honestly, for some of them, it's not a bad thing. They can control it, they can manage it. Some of them might think they can manage it better than they actually can, but they're not sinning by drinking alcohol because they don't see anything wrong with that. And I can respect that. Um, and at this stage, I actually agree that it's not a sin for them. And that's kind of one of the key things for me when it comes to understanding sin is, who are we talking about? So when we talk about, people will say, well, do you believe this is a sin? Um, and probably yes. If you're asking that question to me, you probably know the answer already. So probably yes. But one of the key things to understand is, for me, as I function and work with people, I don't necessarily consider my list of sins to be your list of sins. Okay. Um, Another example from that's very kind of interesting in my faith is caffeine. There are people in my church who believe that drinking caffeine is a sin, and what that means is if they drink caffeine, they are committing a sin. Um, I don't. I know the church has come out with a specific statement saying that caffeine is not against what we call the word of wisdom, which is a kind of a do's and don'ts of consumption of food. Um, However, I also know that I can drink too much of it, and when I drink too much of it, then I'm kind of getting into, maybe, I don't like this concept, but gray sin territory, right? Okay, so going back to alcohol, I like that as an example. It feels more comfortable to me than some of the other things. So if you know that drinking alcohol is wrong for you to do, and you do it, then you're a sinner. If I drink alcohol, I'm a sinner because I know it's wrong. For a recovering alcoholic, if they lapse, then they would be, at least by the way I'm talking about sin here, they would be sinning. My friends who don't, who honestly, truthfully don't believe that it is wrong for them to drink, are not sinning when they drink. And that's my perception. And I know that this opens up this whole thing because our church is very interested in helping people come closer to Christ. And that matters to me too. I do believe that the more Christ-like we live our lives, the better we are. But there are some things that I think we focus on that distract from more important conversations. I did a study once, reading the New Testament, looking at who Jesus condemned the most, and it was hypocrites. He spent most of his time, as far as I got really tired of this because it's not really fun to read the words of Jesus looking for him to say, to condemn people. I don't enjoy, I didn't enjoy it. So I didn't get all the way through the Gospels, I'll be honest. But he condemned the hypocrites. And there is a certain level of hypocrisy, I think, in all of us, because most of us recognize that there are things we should do or shouldn't do in our lives that we don't do or do. I hope that you follow that, right? Yeah. And so as I try to reach out to people, I think there's merit in allowing people to understand how my theology fits into my view of the world. But I also think, well, this is another key part of my understanding of sin. Okay, so I believe that there is a heaven. I believe that there is a divine paradise where those who are good followers of Jesus Christ, who live Christ-like lives, will get to live out eternity. Here's the thing about it. So you're watching this, right? You're looking at this, and some of you might be saying, well, gee, your definition of sin is wrong. Cool, great. I hope that we can have a meeting of the minds, or we can just respect each other's differences on that. But the thing is, if I am sinning in my definition of sin, that's going to impede my progress. What's important for you is to understand how your reaction is going to impede your progress, okay? So any sin, to flip this and put it back on me, any sin that you commit has absolutely no bearing on my eternal salvation. But how I react to your sin does. If I am not reacting to your sin in a Christ-like manner, then I am sinning. And that sin is far more important to me and my eternal progress than your sin is to yours. And so, there's something else I wanted to touch on, and it's missing. It'll come back to me because that's the way I work. But that's important. I think that's a key thing for us to understand is when we're talking to other people and we see them doing something that they shouldn't or not doing something they should, our reaction is what's going to be important to our eternal placement. And their sins are theirs to work through with their Heavenly Father. And I believe absolutely in a loving Savior who is going to seek the best solution to all of our quirks and foibles. And he's going to put us in a place, I see it this way, he's going to put us in a place where we will be the most eternally happy. And I think for me, for my concept of hell, that is a recognition that we fell short of what we could be. I think there are very few of us who are going to end up in a place of absolute torment, like that. So what this means then is when I look at people and I'm thinking, I don't know why there's a certain friend of mine who was one of my teachers and mentors when I was studying in Las Vegas. She has a different set of values than I do. And we have some parallels. We have some very strong parallels, but I know that there are things in this person's life that, I mean, if we were to sit down and hash it out, I would disagree with. But I also know that this person is incredibly genuine, is incredibly interested in their self-improvement and in doing what they see as right. And I find no hypocrisy in their life. And I can respect that, and I can work with a person like that and have very little problems. Um, I know one of the big ones that's being hammered by our church right now is homosexuality. And I had a very fun and fascinating experience with this. There was a man who I worked with at the Utah Shakespearean Festival, and I found out he had a crush on me. And I was a little bit surprised by my response. I was honestly flattered. And it didn't bother me for the very simple reason that I knew he knew my values, and I knew that he knew me and respected me enough to understand that there was no value in pursuing that. And so because he understood where I was and I understood where he was, I had no problems with this guy. I didn't feel the need, and I know there are some people who would say that this is wrong of me, but I kind of don't care. I didn't feel the need to go up to him and say, hey, I heard you have a crush on me. That's wrong. You're going to go to hell for that. It wasn't necessary. He was a good person. He was a wonderful person. He didn't believe that his attraction to me had any sort of sin to it. And I can respect that, and I can work with that. And in the way I work with sin in the world, he wasn't sinning. And I know that in the eternities, that's something that's got to be worked out, but it didn't directly impact me in any way, negative or positive, except to realize that, I'm an attractive guy to some people. And that's cool. I like that. It helps me. But I didn't feel a need to step in judgment. And I think that's one of our big issues is frequently when we're condemning sin, we're actually spending more time judging people than we do in working with them. So unless there are people who are being sincerely, honestly harmed by the actions of another person, if they don't see it as wrong, I can respect that. I can work with them, and it's not going to bother me. If what they're doing does harm other people, say rape or sexual assault, then it's wrong. Then it needs to be addressed and it needs to be fixed. But if I hate the term victimless, but if it's a victimless sin in my estimation, that's not going to stop me from respecting and working with people. It doesn't, this feels weird to say, but it doesn't really bother me. And I'm willing to have conversations about that. And if you want to know my list of sins, I can tell you. I also know that there are sins on my list of sins that I need to work on. So I'm imperfect, and I'd rather focus more on trying to work through my list of sins than giving you a list of yours. And I mean that sincerely. I know that there are a lot of people in my church who would say that, and then on the other side would say, oh my gosh, that guy's going to go to hell. I'm sorry, that guy's going to go to HE double hockey sticks because we don't say hell because, we're not supposed to. Sorry. But that's kind of where I come from, and I'd be happy to expound on this more. But in a nutshell, simplistically speaking, to go back to that, if you know it's wrong and you do it, you're sinning. If you don't believe it's wrong and you do it, as long as other people aren't getting hurt, it might be a sin in my philosophy and my theology, but that doesn't mean anything insofar as how I view you. It's not a sin to you. You don't see it that way. And at some point, this is all going to get worked out. If there's no God and we die, then this whole concept of sin becomes relatively meaningless. If there is a God, when we sit down with that deity, that divine essence, I have absolute faith that if we're good people trying to live a good life, that's going to work out fine. So I hope that helps for those of you who are trying to understand my thoughts on that. If you want more, I can give you more on that, but I've just about hit my time limit, and I really like keeping these to 15 minutes. It feels good to me. So take care of yourself, and I'll probably have more to say later.